I never thought I would be the one to destroy my own brother's life. I never imagined that the jealousy I carried since childhood would transform into something so calculated, so cold, that it would eventually consume everything good in both our worlds. My name is Marcus, and I stole from the one person who trusted me more than anyone else on this earth. I watched his business crumble. I watched his marriage fracture. I watched his health deteriorate while I sat in silence, counting money that was never mine to take. And the worst part, the part that still haunts me every single night, is that I convinced myself I deserved it. This is my confession. Not for sympathy, not for forgiveness. I'm telling you this because the weight of what I did has become unbearable. And somewhere out there, someone might be walking the same path I walked, letting envy poison their soul until they do something they can never undo. If my story stops even one person from making the same mistake, then maybe, just maybe, some good can come from the wreckage I created. It started long before the money. It started in the house where Daniel and I grew up, a modest 3-bedroom home in the suburbs of Manchester. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. 2 sons, 2 hard-working parents, a garden with rose bushes that my mother tended every Sunday morning. But inside those walls, there was an invisible line drawn between my brother and me. A line that separated the son they were proud of from the son they merely tolerated. Daniel was 4 years older than me, and from the moment I could understand words, I understood one thing clearly. He was the golden child. He was the one who brought home perfect marks. He was the one who played football for the county team. He was the one my mother introduced at family gatherings, with her chest puffed out and her voice dripping with pride. And me? I was always the afterthought, the younger one, the one who was mentioned only when someone specifically asked if they had another child. I used to tell myself that I was imagining things, that parents love their children equally, and I was just being dramatic. But children see everything, even when adults think they're being subtle. I saw how my mother's eyes lit up when Daniel walked into a room. I saw how my father leaned forward, completely engaged, whenever Daniel spoke about his dreams. And I saw the way their expressions shifted when it was my turn to share something. That polite smile, that distant nod, that subtle glance at the clock, as if waiting for me to finish so they could return their attention to their preferred son. When Daniel turned 18, my parents gave him £15,000 to help him start his first business venture. They called it an investment in his future. They said he had proven himself, that he was responsible, that he would make something of it. When I turned 18 4 years later, I received a card with £50 inside and a lecture about needing to find my path in life. No investment, no trust, no belief in my potential. Just the implication that I had not yet earned what Daniel received simply by existing. That moment planted a seed of resentment in my heart that would grow for the next 16 years. I tried to ignore it. I tried to tell myself that life was not a competition, that my brother's success did not diminish my own worth, but every family dinner, every Christmas gathering, every casual phone call from my mother that lasted 2 minutes when she spoke to me, and 20 minutes when Daniel called. All of it watered that seed until it became a vine wrapped around my chest, squeezing tighter with every passing year. Daniel, to his credit, never acted like he was better than me. He was genuinely kind. He called me regularly just to check in. He invited me to his business events. He even offered to help me financially during the years when I was struggling to find steady work. And that kindness, that completely undeserved kindness, only made me resent him more. Because how could I justify my bitterness toward someone who had done nothing wrong? How could I hate him when he loved me unconditionally? The answer is that I couldn't justify it. So instead of addressing my own broken thinking, I buried the resentment deeper, where it festered in the darkness of my soul. By the time I was 30 years old, Daniel had built a successful logistics company called Hayes Transport Solutions. It was not a massive corporation, but it was thriving. 40 employees, contracts with major retailers, a reputation for reliability and efficiency. He had done it all from scratch, starting with that initial investment from our parents and growing it through years of 16-hour days and countless sacrifices. His wife, Claire, supported him through every difficult year, and together they had built a life that anyone would admire. A beautiful home, a healthy daughter named Emma, a marriage that seemed genuinely happy. And then, when I least expected it, Daniel offered me a position in his company. I had been working a dead-end administrative job at a logistics firm in London, earning just enough to cover rent and keep myself from drowning in debt. When Daniel called me one evening and said he wanted me to come work for him, that he needed someone he could trust to manage the financial operations while he focused on expansion, I felt something shift inside me. Part of me was genuinely grateful. Part of me saw an opportunity to finally turn my life around. But there was another part, a darker part, that saw something else entirely. Access. I moved back to Manchester within the month. Daniel set me up in a comfortable flat just 10 minutes from the office. He gave me a salary that was more than I had ever earned in my life. He introduced me to his partners, his clients, his employees, always with that same proud smile, always saying, "This is my brother Marcus, the smartest person I know when it comes to numbers." He trusted me completely. He handed me the keys to his kingdom without a moment's hesitation, and for the first 6 months I was loyal. I worked harder than I had ever worked in my life. I reorganized the accounting systems, identified inefficiencies, saved the company nearly £40,000 in the first quarter alone. Daniel praised me at every opportunity. He told me that bringing me on board was the best decision he had ever made. And for a brief moment, I believed that maybe, finally, I could stand beside my brother as an equal. Maybe I could earn my own place in the family story. Maybe the resentment could fade. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a Wednesday evening. I was working late at the office, going through some old financial records, when I found a folder I had never seen before. Inside were documents dating back to when Daniel first started the company. Bank statements, investment records, notes written in my father's handwriting. And there, in black and white, was a truth that shattered whatever fragile peace I had built. The £15,000 my parents gave Daniel was not their only contribution. Over the following 3 years, they had secretly funneled an additional £60,000 into his business. Money that came from a fund I later discovered was meant for both of us. My grandfather had left behind an inheritance when he passed away, divided equally between the 2 grandchildren. But my parents, convinced that Daniel would use it wisely while I would waste it, had quietly redirected my share into his company without ever telling me. £75,000. That was the difference between Daniel's head start and my lifelong struggle. £75,000 of money that was rightfully mine, taken from me before I even knew it existed. I cannot describe the rage I felt in that moment. It was not just anger at my parents. It was validation of every bitter thought I had ever had. Every time I told myself I was imagining the favoritism, every time I convinced myself I was being unfair to my family, I had been wrong. They had stolen from me. They had decided without consulting me, that I was not worth investing in. And now I was supposed to be grateful for a job, working for the brother who had built his empire on the foundation of my stolen inheritance. I should have confronted them. I should have demanded answers, demanded my share, demanded acknowledgement of the injustice, but I did not. Because in that moment of consuming rage, a different plan began to form in my mind. A plan that felt, at the time, like justice. If they had taken my money and given it to Daniel, then I would take it back. Slowly, quietly, pound by pound until the scales were balanced. It started small, a few £100 here and there, redirected through expense accounts and hidden in the complexity of the company's growing financial operations. I told myself I was only taking what was mine. I told myself I would stop once I reached 75,000. I told myself that Daniel would never even notice. His company was profitable enough to absorb the loss, but that was the first of many lies I would tell myself over the following 2 years. The thing about crossing a moral line is that once you do it, the line becomes invisible. The first time I transferred money into my personal account, my hands were shaking. The second time, my heart was racing. But by the 10th time, by the 20th time, I felt nothing at all. The guilt had been silenced by justification. The fear had been replaced by entitlement. And somewhere along the way, I stopped counting whether I had reached 75,000. I just kept taking. Over 2 years, I embezzled nearly £300,000 from my brother's company. I bought a nicer car. I took expensive holidays. I invested in property. I told myself I deserved these things, that life owed me after decades of being overlooked. And every time I saw Daniel working late, stressed about cash flow problems he could not explain, I told myself it was not my fault. He would figure it out. He had always figured it out. He was the golden child, after all. The first sign that something was truly wrong came when Daniel had to lay off 12 employees. I was there when he made the announcement. I watched him stand in front of people who had worked for him for years, his voice breaking as he explained that the company was facing unexpected financial difficulties. He apologized to each of them personally. He shook their hands. He promised to provide references and severance packages that the company could barely afford. And I stood in the back of the room, silent, feeling something crack inside my chest. Those were real people. Fathers and mothers with children to feed, mortgages to pay, lives that depended on the job my brother had given them, and I had taken that from them. Not Daniel, not the economy, me. But even then, I could not stop. The money had become an addiction, and the justifications had become a fortress around my conscience. I told myself that Daniel should have managed better. I told myself that companies face difficulties all the time. I told myself that this was karma for the family that had failed me. Anything to avoid looking in the mirror and seeing what I had become. 6 months after the layoffs, Daniel's wife Claire asked to meet me for coffee. I assumed it was a casual family catch-up, but the moment I sat down across from her, I saw something in her eyes that made my blood run cold. She knew. I was certain of it. She had figured out what I had done, and this was the confrontation I had been dreading. But I was wrong. Claire did not know about the theft. She had come to ask me for help because she was worried about Daniel. He had become withdrawn, anxious, unable to sleep. He had started drinking more than usual. Their marriage was strained because he kept blaming himself for the company's problems, kept saying he must have made mistakes somewhere that he could not identify. Claire told me that Daniel had always looked up to me when it came to finances. and she was hoping I could review the books with fresh eyes, find whatever was going wrong, help him understand that it was not his fault. She was asking me to investigate myself. I sat across from my brother's wife, watching tears form in her eyes as she described how the man she loved was falling apart. And I told her I would do everything I could to help. I looked her directly in the face and lied. And then I went home and lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, feeling something I had not felt in years. Shame. It was not enough to stop me. Nothing ever is when you're that far gone. But it was enough to make me start covering my tracks more carefully, altering records, creating false paper trails, doing everything in my power to ensure that when Daniel inevitably brought in external auditors, they would find nothing. And for a while, it worked. The auditors came. They reviewed the books. They concluded that the financial difficulties were due to market conditions and operational inefficiencies. Exactly what I had designed them to find. Daniel was relieved. For a brief moment, he seemed to recover some of his old energy. But the damage had already been done. The company was drowning in debt. Contracts were being lost to competitors. Employees who remained were overworked and underpaid. And Daniel, consumed by the need to save what he had built, was working himself into the ground. Then came the phone call from Sophie Mitchell, Daniel's business partner. Sophie had been with the company since the beginning. She was sharp, meticulous, and absolutely relentless when something did not add up. She had never liked me. I always sensed that she saw through the surface-level charm I used with everyone else. So when she called me and asked to meet privately, away from the office, I knew that my fortress of lies was about to be tested. We met at a pub outside the city, somewhere neither of us would be recognized. Sophie sat across from me with a folder in her hands and an expression that told me everything I needed to know before she spoke a single word. She had found discrepancies. Not all of them. The auditors had missed too much for her to see the full picture. But enough. Transactions that did not match invoices. Expense claims that seemed designed to obscure, rather than clarify. Patterns that suggested someone inside the company was bleeding it dry. Sophie looked at me and said, "I know it's you, Marcus." In that moment, I had a choice. I could have confessed. I could have thrown myself on her mercy, begged her not to tell Daniel, offered to repay everything. But instead, I did what I had been doing for 2 years. I lied. I told Sophie she was wrong. I told her the discrepancies were due to rushed accounting during the company's rapid expansion. I told her that if she brought these accusations to Daniel without proof, she would destroy the only family support he had left. I even managed to sound offended, indignant, like a man wrongly accused. Sophie did not believe me. I could see it in her eyes. But she also could not prove it. Not yet. She warned me that she would be watching, that she would find the evidence, that the truth always comes out eventually. And then she left, and I sat alone in that pub, drinking whiskey after whiskey, knowing that my time was running out. The next 6 months were the worst of my life. Every day felt like walking on thin ice, waiting for the crack that would plunge me into freezing water. I could barely look Daniel in the eye. I could barely sleep. The money I had taken sat in accounts I was too afraid to touch. A fortune built on betrayal that brought me no joy at all. And still, I watched my brother's life collapse around him. The company eventually went into administration. Daniel lost everything. The business he had built over 15 years, the home he and Claire had purchased together, the college fund he had been saving for Emma. He moved his family into a rented flat. He took a job working for a competitor, doing the same work he used to oversee, for a fraction of the salary. His health deteriorated. His marriage, already strained, came within inches of ending. I attended family dinners where my mother praised Daniel for his resilience, never once acknowledging her own role in creating the conditions that led to his downfall. I listened to my father offer advice about rebuilding, completely unaware that the son he had always overlooked was the one who had torn everything down, and I played my part, nodding sympathetically, offering support, pretending to be the loyal brother everyone believed me to be. Then, on a cold December evening, Daniel collapsed. It was a stress-induced cardiac event, not a full heart attack, but serious enough to land him in hospital for a week. I remember standing in that sterile waiting room, watching Claire weep, watching Emma cling to her mother, watching my parents age a decade in a single night. And somewhere in the depths of my corrupted soul, the truth I had been avoiding for years finally forced its way to the surface. I had done this. Not market conditions, not bad luck. Me. I had stolen from my brother, and the theft had set off a chain of events that destroyed his business, shattered his family, and nearly killed him. The £75,000 my parents redirected, the money I had used to justify everything, seemed suddenly insignificant compared to the devastation I had caused. I had told myself I was taking back what was mine. But what I had actually done was become the very thing I hated. I had become someone who decided that my brother's life was worth less than my own satisfaction. I left the hospital that night and drove to a bridge on the outskirts of the city. I parked my car and stood there in the freezing wind, looking down at the water, wondering if disappearing would be easier than facing what I had done. I stood there for hours, numb, hollow, utterly lost. But I did not jump, not because I found some sudden courage or redemption. I did not jump because even then, in my darkest moment, I was still a coward. I was too afraid to die, just as I had been too afraid to live honestly. So I drove home, and I sat in darkness until morning, and I made a decision. I would confess. It took me 3 more weeks to find the courage. 3 weeks of rehearsing speeches, of imagining Daniel's face when he learned the truth, of preparing myself for the hatred I knew I deserved. And then, on a Sunday afternoon in January, I asked Daniel to meet me alone. We sat in his small rented flat, the walls thin enough to hear neighbors arguing, the furniture secondhand and worn. Daniel looked older than his 38 years, tired, beaten, but somehow still kind. He offered me tea. He asked how I was doing. He thanked me for being there during everything. And then I told him. I told him about finding the inheritance documents. I told him about the rage that had consumed me. I told him about every pound I had taken, every lie I had told, every moment I had watched his life crumble knowing I was the cause. I held nothing back. I showed him the bank records, the spreadsheets, the evidence of my own destruction. And when I finished, I sat in silence, waiting for the explosion I deserved. Daniel did not explode. He did not shout, did not curse, did not throw me out. He sat very still for a long time, staring at the floor, and when he finally looked up, there were tears streaming down his face. But they were not tears of anger. They were tears of grief. "I knew," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sophie told me her suspicions months ago. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe you would do that to me. So I convinced myself she was wrong." He had known, or at least suspected, and he had chosen not to investigate further because the truth was more painful than the uncertainty. My brother had protected me, even while I was destroying him. What happened next was not a dramatic confrontation. It was not a courtroom scene or a family intervention. It was something far more devastating. A quiet, private reckoning between two brothers who had been shaped by the same broken family, who had both been victims in different ways, and who now had to decide what came next. Daniel did not forgive me. He made that clear. He said forgiveness might come someday, but it would take years, and I would have to earn it through actions rather than words. He told me to leave his home and not contact him until he was ready. He said he would not report me to the police, not to protect me, but to protect Claire and Emma from the additional trauma of a public trial. That mercy, that undeserved grace was harder to accept than any punishment. In the months that followed, I liquidated everything I had accumulated: the car, the property, the investments. Every pound I had taken, I converted back into accessible funds. It came to just under $280,000, less than I had stolen, due to losses and expenditures, but everything I had left. I transferred it all to an account in Daniel's name, anonymously, with a letter explaining that it was repayment, not absolution. I also went to Sophie and confessed directly. She was less restrained than Daniel. She told me exactly what she thought of me, in language I will not repeat here. But she also agreed not to pursue legal action, on the condition that I sign a statement admitting my guilt, which she would keep as insurance in case I ever tried to cause harm again. I signed without hesitation. And then I confronted my parents. That conversation was the hardest of all. Not because I was confessing my own crimes. By then, I was almost numb to the shame. It was hard because I finally said out loud what I had been feeling for 34 years. I told them about the inheritance they had stolen from me. I told them about the favoritism that had shaped my entire childhood. I told them that while none of it excused what I had done to Daniel, they were not innocent either. My mother denied everything at first. She said I was deflecting, making excuses, trying to blame others for my own failures. But my father, quiet, conflict-avoidant Richard, broke down. He admitted that they had redirected my inheritance. He admitted that they had always seen Daniel as the safer investment. He said they had convinced themselves it was the right decision, that I would understand someday, that I would never need to know. He apologized, genuinely apologized. And while it did not undo 34 years of feeling invisible, it was something. A crack in the wall that had separated me from any sense of belonging in my own family. It has been 18 months since my confession. My relationship with Daniel is fragile, but slowly healing. We speak occasionally, brief calls, careful words, both of us navigating unfamiliar territory. He is rebuilding his life. Not the same life he had before, but something new. He started a small consulting firm. His marriage survived. Emma is thriving. And sometimes, when we talk, I hear glimpses of the brother who used to call me the smartest person he knew when it came to numbers. I do not know if he will ever fully forgive me. I do not know if I will ever fully forgive myself. The guilt does not disappear. It sits in my chest like a stone, a constant reminder of what I am capable of when I let resentment consume me. But I am learning to carry it, to use it as a weight that keeps me grounded, rather than a force that drags me under.